All right. Well, I know we don't have a tremendous amount of time, and you guys have a lot of sessions to get through. So we're actually going to get going. And I assume as people join, they will be able to pop right in. And I do believe that this is being recorded so that anyone who pops in late can also check out that. So good morning, or depending on where you live, I guess it would be good afternoon. I am Heather Gowdy. I'm the Chief of Talent Services at DRG. And this is my colleague, Adam Norse. He is many things. He's a search consultant, but he also runs a soccer club. So he has deep experience in both worlds. So I am going to share my screen right now and get into the content. We are going to talk about a couple things today. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to our firm, and then we're going to get to the main topic, which is 3 common mistakes that CEOs and EDs often make when working in the field, be they new or very established. The things we're talking about, we've seen in both kinds of organizations. But before we do that, just like I said, a quick bit about us. So DRG is a talent advisory firm. What does that mean? So we support nonprofits in addressing the full range of talent challenges. So this includes things like executive search, helping you find your next CEO, your next ED, your next development director, director of technology, marketing, that kind of thing. But we also do a lot of work with organizational design, with succession planning, with transition planning, onboarding new staff, and then really supporting and training the talent, the teams that you have. So that could be through executive coaching, it could be through individual development, it could be through team development, team dynamics. So we've been in business about 33 years. We work across North America, and we're really all guided by a deep belief in the power of exceptional talent. So talent drives organizations, right? Strategy drives organizations, but you can't implement a strategy without your talent. And we are also guided by a set of values, chief among which is partnership. So we really like to partner with organizations to be creative, be innovative, be forward-thinking, with respecting to attracting talent, integrating talent into the organization, and then supporting and developing them once we're there. So after that brief introduction, I'm going to pass it off to Adam, who's going to open it up for us and give us a preview of what we're talking about.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Depends on where you are. So my background is, as Heather mentioned, I've been a program director at a youth soccer club for the last 7 years, part of the exec team. And now I'm working with DRG, and we're going to talk about 3 common mistakes that we come across at DRG, but I've come across in my role that exec directors make, CEOs, or whatever your name is. The name, if you're a leader of a nonprofit or mission-driven organization, these are just things that I've noticed from personal experience, and Heather has come across in her years of consulting. So this list is by no means exhaustive. It's not really in any particular order. We could sort of chew the fat and argue this all day, but in the interest of keeping this within 45 minutes and letting everyone get back to the schedule, their lunch, etc., we've put 3 down. So we want this session to be interactive. We don't want it to be an information dump and death by PowerPoint presentation. So please, when the time's right, we'll give you an opportunity to talk, share, reflect. There's no right or wrong answers. It's certainly a safe space here. So the first one we're going to talk about is failing to partner with the board. And again, regardless of the size of your organization or your title, we just think this is such a huge one, just a huge. So number one, we're going to talk about failing to partner with the board. Heather, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So we often ask when we are called to have a conversation with a nonprofit, work with a nonprofit, what's your board like? Is your board strong? Does it work well? Do you love it? Or is there something that you would want to change? And I think maybe once ever, I've had someone say, we have an outstanding board, we are a model, we are great. The truth is, it's work to work with a board, and the board isn't going anywhere. And the most successful organizations do work with their board, not around them. And unfortunately, a lot of leaders, executives of nonprofits find themselves trying to work around their board at various times. So it's not always easy. There are, as I said, lots of less than optimally functional boards. Sometimes it's that they haven't been trained well enough. Sometimes it goes all the way back to recruiting of new board members. You are desperate to get supporters on, you bring them on, and they don't quite work the way you want them to work. Sometimes board members bring their individual passions, which can be great. That's what you want. But if they stick too closely to their individual passions, as opposed to the organization's vision and mission, that can be problematic. And then other boards, particularly nowadays, can just get tired or worn out, particularly if your board members are on multiple boards at a time like now when they're being constantly asked for money and time and support. The energy can kind of go away. So regardless of why you have challenges, you do need the board, and working well with them should be a priority. So what does that mean? What are some tips? The first thing is to spend time developing relationships. And by that, I mean relationships with all of the board members. Get to know them individually, why they're there, what their passion is, what their talents are, what their background is, and how they can be leveraged to help the organization. But the number one relationship you want to think about is the relationship with the board chair. So the chief executive and board chair is the most important partnership in your nonprofit. That's the one you want to spend time on. You want to foster it. If you're an executive out there, you want to think, my board chair is an amazing, ideal thought partner with me, and challenger to me, and booster and supporter and ambassador, all of those things. But if you have to kind of pick and choose where you spend your time on board development, that's a key thing, is spending time on that relationship there. So Adam's going to go over a couple more.
I think in my experience, being involved with the youth soccer club for the last 7-8 years is being proactive with the board. The board, they're volunteers. They have other jobs for the most part. So I think being proactive with updates, program-wise, and overviews are massively important. So I always like to send at least 3 days, ideally 5 days in advance, an agenda with as much data and provide as much data as you can, really, just so they can think around it. You can go over highlights during the meeting. So you're controlling what you can control. There's nothing worse than going to a board meeting and they're reading through, slides or paper, etc., and you're not really getting to the nitty-gritty. So my experience, my piece of advice would be control what you can control and be proactive. Also, just control the agenda. Invite board members out to see programs. Take them out onto in my context, I'm going to say field. I mean, whatever your area is, take them out to the field. Show them what you're doing. And I think the more that you can do that and bring them into the mix, and bring them more into the fabric of the organization, so they can feel it and give ideas and be a counsel, as Heather mentioned too, the better, really. What hasn't worked for me, the title of our presentation as mistakes, is when you run away from the board. The board isn't going anywhere. So I've seen leaders in the exec team that have seen the board as a hindrance, and it doesn't tend to work very well. So I think embracing them, being strong as well. Sometimes you get quite strong personalities on a board. So having certain boundaries and setting expectations up front, if you can do that through agendas, being proactive and controlling what you can control, that leads to a healthier outcome and a healthier relationship, in my experience. Leverage your expertise. So you it's okay going off their LinkedIn profile, but the way you really get to understand a board member's expertise, in my opinion, is getting to know them. So whether it's inviting them to a program, invite them out for a coffee or lunch, etc., I just encourage you to do that. Yeah, it's a time commitment. We're all busy individuals, but the more you get to know your board members individually and collectively, the more you can tap into their expertise, which helps you delegate. And that brings on me to the next point here, is creating effective committees. For me, board meetings, you can get lost. You cover a lot of different topics, going over minutes from last meetings, and all of a sudden it's 6:30, and then you look at your watch again, it's nearly 11 p.m. But I really find that the committees are where the work gets done. That's where you can get granular. That's where you can really put your board members in positions of power for impact as well. So take some time to first understand the expertise of your board members, and then get really granular and strategic about your committees, so that you can send off little, I like to think of them and describe them as task forces, so they can go away, do the work, and really keep driving on towards your mission. And the last 2 points are, go to the board for fundraising. Whether you ask all the board to fundraise and put in, that varies from organization to organization, depending on the size, understandably, but at least have the conversation. Ask them to go to their contacts, raise money, whatever the size of the gift could be, or it might be a strategic partnership. They might be able to get you equipment or office space, whatever that can be, but that should always be a topic that you're talking about. Just fundraising. It can never get too old, in my opinion. And last, and this is the role for me that sums up, exec, CEO, whatever our title is you know the organization better than the board. You're working on the ground in the organization day in, day out. So inspire them. Tell the story. Tell them what you're doing. How you've impacted individuals or communities, etc. The more you inspire them, the more you're going to lift them up, and they're going to want to help and get involved. So inspiration will be the last thing I touch on for partnering with the board. But don't run away from the board. Embrace the board.
Yeah. I'm curious, for anyone who is willing and interested to come off mute for a moment, what your biggest board challenge is, and a question for now, but also for later when you get back. If you were thinking of your board on a scale of 1 to 5 and your relationship with the board, where are you? And if you're not at 5, amazing relationship with the board, super effective board, what's one thing that you might do or that you're hoping to do? Does anyone want to volunteer?
Or feel free to put in the chat. I've got the chat box here, so feel free to type something there.
I will say offhand that board development is one of the first go-tos with a lot of organizations, as I know I need to do it. It's important. I've heard it's important. And it's also one of the things that gets postponed the most, because program in particular, and finances and fund development all demand a lot of an executive's time, of an executive's team's time. And stepping aside and devoting time to board development, well, in the short term, can feel like a sacrifice of time that you need for other things. It's the longer term investment. So for those who wouldn't give a 5 answer, I would encourage you to go have a conversation with your board chair or with your exec committee or the entire board, and ask board members as well. What could we do? What's one thing we could do to make this board more effective, to help you as board members better support the organization, and to help me as an executive better leverage what you bring? Often they have ideas and they just don't know how to bring them to fruition. All right, so with that, we are going to go to the second sort of mistake that organizations often make, and it has to do with vision. So, Adam, why don't you take us away?
Yeah, can we just go to slide 7, please?
Sure.
Heather? Thank you. So, creating a vision statement. Before I jump in, does anyone want to share either verbally or again in the chat? What does vision mean in the nonprofit context? We'll give it 7 seconds, see if anyone wants to add. Have we got someone? Okay, no problem. So vision in the nonprofit context is really just, it's articulating your personal vision combined with a vision for the organization. So as it says here, that the change you wish to seek and see in the world. So it's really taking the time to sit down away from the busyness of everyday tasks and articulating your vision and your dream, and putting in practical next steps to bring that vision to life. So a shared belief about the future. You believe you can create for the organization and the communities, the individuals that you're impacting through your nonprofit. So it's a statement of intent as well. That's what I like to call it. It's a statement of intent. And sometimes only you know what your vision is. So taking the time to do this and articulate it really allows others to buy into it. And I found this really helpful. Next one, why craft a vision statement? Going back to the board piece as well. So it's the board, they're not working the organization day to day. Often they're busy. So having a vision statement that you've articulated and broken down, it's not too in-depth and not too wordy, but quite clear and succinct. It really, again, inspires stakeholders and board members, key members of staff, and it builds buy-in. It tells them, look, this is what we can achieve if we all work together. It's getting everyone on the same page. It's also great for fundraising as well. So if you're going to donors, whether it's foundations or just individuals, sharing your vision statement with them rather than just verbalizing it, and sharing and saying, this is what I think, or well, this is what I know we can do. This is my 1 year, 3 year, 5 year vision for the organization. Gets everyone on the same page. And practically, takeaways for the group here today, it really helps you decide your list of priorities. So the to-do list is never ending. We all know that. But I think going back to a vision statement allows you to work out, okay, what do I need to focus on right now? What isn't as important? So it's a document, it's a living, breathing document, I should say, that can change, but it should be referred to pretty regularly. It allows you to realign and focus and know why we get out of bed every day, really. So it can inspire not only others, but inspire yourself. And the last 2 points here, it can measure impact. Am I achieving, or are we achieving what we set out to achieve in terms of impact? You can obviously do surveys and feedback to get more granular feedback on that. It can also be used when you're developing staff as well. So I'm just a big, passionate believer in creating a vision statement, going back to it often, because it really drives the organization, it drives your vision, and it allows you to reflect often, readdress, sometimes repivot, but it just keeps you on course towards that long-term mission as well.
I just want to throw something in there too as well, specifically with respect to impact. So one of the traps that we often see organizations get into is getting so caught up in outputs and the actual day-to-day work that you're doing, and getting a little more disconnected from outcomes. So, amazing, we served X kids this year, we trained this many coaches, we launched this many new classes. Evaluation is a big thing, right? We want to evaluate our work, our funders want us to evaluate our work, we end up trying to count everything and sometimes lose track. Okay, you served 1,000 kids, but more importantly, perhaps, we need to ask, did those kids experience the impact that we are striving to achieve? And that gets back to your vision. Are we moving toward that envisioned future that we defined with the work that we're doing? Or do we need to maybe focus a little bit less on the quantity and a little bit more on just continuing to dive closer and closer to making sure everything we do is driving toward that impact? So something to think about there. It's not always easy to focus on vision and crafting a vision statement. I think, Adam, I know, has personal examples of this as well, and I've seen it. Investing the time, getting people to sit down there. Sometimes it can be messy because board members don't necessarily share the same vision or want to align around a fully common vision. And you're nodding, so I'm going to let you take that one, Adam.
Yeah, I think pitfalls. Why do we not create a vision statement? Because we're busy and there's other priorities. It takes time. I think the most successful vision statements, and the theory is easier than living it out and putting it together, is, asking if you have a staff. And not everyone has a staff in there in where they're at, not all the organizations, but if you have a staff of other execs or key staff members, is get their feedback. What do you see as the vision? Maybe you can learn something. So it takes time to actually get the feedback. Maybe, I know organizations have run focus groups, really set aside half a day or a day to really understand what the rest of the team see as the vision. So all that takes time, and everyone's checking emails and first. It's hard to set that time aside to actually do it. It can be messy as well, because if you have a team and a team, they might be saying different things to what you're saying, and the vision statement can change depending on worldwide pandemics. You might have to change your vision, so it can certainly be messy. It's not linear, and that might come from feedback from communities you're serving, individuals you're serving. So yeah, it can be messy, but I just want to encourage you, take the time to at least start a vision statement. And it doesn't have to be a whole in-depth process. Even 30 minutes, getting something down in your phone, whatever it is, when you're, I was going to say commuting, but we don't do that these days. Just get something just to build from it. It's just a real anchor in the busy times. Sure.
We wanted to share an idea. This is an exercise you can do on your own. It's an exercise you can do with your boards, you can do with your staff. We've actually facilitated this virtually with teams of people before. We have one client who just gathered their staff for an outdoor, socially distanced retreat where they sat in blankets far away and had a team competition as to which small team could do this and come up with the most creative ideas. But it's basically using the analogy of a news headline and saying, okay, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, if someone were to write a headline, either about our organization and the impact that we've had, what would it say? Or about our field. So if it's, X aspect of youth sports, what's going on with youth sports? What amazing thing has happened? What change has happened in the world? or what challenge is out there? What might you see in a news headline? And there's a couple ways you could do this. You could just leave it at that. What's the news headline in 15 years? That's our vision. If we want to see that positive statement, we have something to aim for. Like, we have a role in making that happen. Another way you could do it, which I'm hearing more and more about, particularly in the pandemic, is use it as a little bit of a scenario planning exercise. So one scenario is we have this amazing headline that paints a rosy picture of what we've accomplished, in essence, in 15 years, and therefore we're driving toward that. Another is to say, youth actually can't play sports anymore because XYZ, or there's no more in-person blank, because we never got rid of COVID, please. Something totally different. Try and make it opposite of your very rosy sort of visionary statement. What would you do then? Like, how would your organization respond? How can you think ahead? So again, it could be an exercise to help you develop your vision statement if you don't have one, or if you want to refine it or check it, but it also could be an exercise to help you plan for a couple different scenarios in the future. With that, we'll just take a second. If anyone wants to come off mute or pop on video or share something that's worked particularly well with your organization, or ask a question.
I'm manning the chat box, so I'm ready.
The chat box expert. All right. Well, we'll leave time at the end as well, but feel free to use the chat box at any time. We're going to go on to the third challenge, the third common mistake. And we see this with teeny tiny one-person organizations. And we also see this with some large organizations and perhaps even sprawling organizations. It's a huge barrier for a lot of organizations, and that's not attending to leadership development and specifically succession planning. So similar as what we said with the board, it can be easy to set aside and deprioritize board development if you're busy, you're desperate for funding, you're struggling to revamp your programs in the face of an external challenge, etc. But it's also important. Long-term planning around your programmatic strategy, long-term planning around your operational strategy, what's the baseline that supports your program work, and long-term planning around your talent strategy are critical. So I'm going to ask 3 questions. And given that it seems like people are kind of doing their own thing a little bit, we won't necessarily make you answer out loud, but I want you to think about how many of you have an emergency succession plan. So this is the hit by a bus scenario. Nowadays, you could call it the hit by COVID scenario. Your chief executive or some other key player in your executive team is suddenly out. Do you have an actual plan to articulate what's happening next? Who takes over what? How can they do it quickly? Within 24 hours, you're still moving straight ahead. Second question, how many of you have engaged in some kind of departure-defined succession planning? So sometime in the next 2 years, you know that you might leave, you might transition to a new role, your fill in the blank, other executive team member might leave. This is how we're going to move from here to there. We're not at the point of starting a search necessarily, but we want to make sure we have our ducks in a row. We're setting ourselves up for success. That's the second kind of planning. And then the third kind of planning is really ongoing, and it's strategic leader development. And that's making sure you have and are investing in people that could eventually take over key roles or responsibilities, parts of roles even. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about each. And I will say, if you don't have one of these and you feel like you need it, lots of resources out there. You're welcome to get in touch with us at the end or after this presentation, and we'd be happy to share some examples with you. So the first, emergency succession plan. This, as I said, this is the hit by the bus, hit by the virus, whatever, but you essentially need to ensure that the organization can function effectively in the event of something unplanned, some absence of either the executive director, the CEO, some key leader. It's really about risk management. You need to create it, but then you need to check it and update it pretty regularly because things change in the organization. This is everything from the mundane, where are the bank accounts? What are the passwords to get into them? All the way to, who's handling payroll, to we've launched a strategic planning process with our board. Can that carry on if you're suddenly out for a month or 2 months or heaven forbid longer? So very small to the very big, but essentially something that someone could take off the shelf and say, we're good while you do what you need to do. Second kind is departure defined. The focus here is really a smooth transition. So as I said, you can start this long before you're ready to do a search for whoever it is that's leaving, but it's thinking about, do we have things in our culture we want to address before this person moves on? Is there expertise that this person has that they could share with others? Can they do something to help us develop maybe a successor? Maybe there's a specific internal person who could take over a role, but maybe it's just spreading knowledge and information and skill building, mentoring ahead of time so that whenever a new person does come in, you have a team that is strong and confident and ready to support them. You're building capacity of staff. You're also building the capacity of systems. Because whenever you have a transition, particularly of the chief executive, you want to think about how can we maintain our funding, our relationships, particularly our funding relationships, but all relationships, our programs seamlessly. What are we losing in terms of expertise, connections, etc. All of the activities for an organization. And you want to be able to do that through a transition and after a transition so that those outside the organization don't see kind of whatever bumps there may be in the road as a chief executive transitions in or out. And you're really also setting up a new person for success when you focus on stuff like this, because it can be hard to come into an established organization, no matter how small or how big. And the third kind of sort of transition or succession planning is really strategic leader development. So as we said, that is developing your people and their capacity and their capability to do what is required of them now, but also what it would be required should they be asked to take on new roles in the future. And it's not just take on new roles because people are leaving. Maybe there's not quite so much turnover right now at this very moment, but historically, if you can't provide growth opportunities for your staff, you will lose them over time. People need to grow, they need to learn, they want to transition into new roles. And if you have an organization that's pretty static, you're in that role, there's really nowhere to go. They're likely to grow to a certain point and then say, all right, now I'm going to go and I'm going to grow somewhere else. Sometimes that's a good thing, but often you want to keep them. So how can you develop your future leaders? How can you support your future leaders? How can you know what you have internally so well that you can very quickly identify opportunities for recruiting new people, new skills, new talents? How can you repurpose people? Often, and the pandemic is a great example of this, you find we need to pivot. We need to shift strategies right away. We need to do a lot more online. We need to start focusing on a different age group. We need lots of things. Do we have anyone on staff with that expertise or that interest? Maybe that's not what they've done so far, but maybe we can shift them into a different kind of role. If you've been focusing on leadership development all along, you'll know those people, you'll know what they're capable of, you'll know what they're interested in, and you'll be able to do some of that. So ideally, you want to commit to developing the people that you have. And then when you bring someone else on board, developing them over time as well.
Heather, can I just speak to that last point real quick?
Yeah.
I think the developing the talent you've got within the sports philanthropy space that we're all in, whether you're in sports-based youth development, youth sports, foundations, whatever you do, I think it's such a new area, an emerging area, that a lot of individuals are drawn there because they've got a passion for sport. I think, if we're going to retain the best talent and we're really going to impact through whatever your strain of sports philanthropy is or youth sports is, we can't overlook this leadership development. You've got to show them that there's a career path, that there's longevity, that there's growth. Otherwise, we're going to lose them. We're going to lose good men and women to the private sector, the people that are offering this. So I think this is really important. just keeping in touch with them and then checking in. I mean, where do they want to grow? How can you support them, etc. So yeah, I think that's a very big one for sure.
I want to circle back to our first topic too, which was boards and board development. Succession planning is super important at the staff level, but it's also really important at the board level. And some of you may have board members for whom this is their first experience on a board, and others of you, particularly maybe larger, more established organizations, or new organizations that were able to attract kind of the big stars. You may have people who are used to being on boards. They're on 10 boards. At the same time, particularly the newer ones, they're going to want to develop, and they're going to want to leave at some point. Some board members will never leave, even if you would like them to. So term limits, by the way, is a great thing to have. But you can do a lot to support the board in its succession planning. And I think we mentioned this in the beginning, but it goes back to you as an executive want a solid relationship with your board chair. And the more you can work with the board chair and the board to build their own skills and capacity to think about leadership succession in the board so that you know who the next chair is likely to be, and they know the culture, they know the vision, the mission, you work well with them. Okay, now that transition has gone well. Now who's behind them? Who else is there? Rotate people through, keep people interested. Just like staff don't want to stagnate, board members don't want to stagnate either. So succession planning, honestly, is a topic for staff and for board members. And it's important even if you as an exec have no intention of going anywhere for 20 years. Still important to think about. Does anyone have questions about this third area in particular, or stories, examples?
My board, we're in the process of the next board meeting having elections over again. So we're kind of in the process of getting to find out who the next leaders are, and the president is stepping down. And I had a talk with the executive director. My goal is to start a nonprofit basketball program. So she mentioned to me how about taking over her spot at the same time while doing that basketball program. So I kind of have to leave my role that I'm good at to go work at her goal and focus on her goal and try to figure out what I need to do, because my role was the first part of the program. Like, I was the first one to be in that part. Mm-hmm. And now she wants me to take over the program.
So you're saying, if I got this right, you had a particular focus, you started something that was very aligned with your passions and your skills and background, and now you're going to have to stretch.
Yeah, I will need to stretch big time because I was the student board member. Now I need to be the director.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions you may want to ask of this person who's asking you to step into the role, and then others who will be working around you and supporting you, is what support can you give me? What can I learn from you? What can you share that will help me be successful? And you can ask them also, what do you most need from me? So as I step into this role, what are your expectations for me and for this program? What do you think should be my top priority as I do this, and over what time frame? And then if you hear that and you say, I can do that, that's great. If you hear that and you say, I can do that, but this is the support that I will need, get very specific. Like, write it down, talk through it with someone on the board, someone else on staff, an advisor, and say, I can be successful, but to do that, I will need you to really support me in this way. I will need you to connect me to these people and introduce me as the new person doing X. I'll need you to help me with fundraising. I'll need you, etc. So for you to be, if you were to look back in 2 years and say, I made this transition and I was amazingly successful, what do you need to get from here to there? And don't be afraid to ask. Nonprofit management is a team sport. You need everybody.
My board, there's only 3 of us. Me, the rep, then the president, then the executive director. There's other leaders as well, other directors, but they don't put in almost hardly any of the work.
Yeah.
So I would like to see why they aren't doing anything and what's the purpose of them being on the board.
Mm-hmm. So 2 things you might want to think about that a lot of people have found helpful in situations like this. One is work with the people who are enthusiastic, your very small group, and develop a job description for a board member. This is what we need. This is what's expected of a board member. And then you can review that with those board members who are more in the periphery and not necessarily pulling their weight, and saying, this is what we need. Does this a fit for you? Are you able to step up and help us with these things, fulfill this role? And if not, it's okay. This might not be the right place for you right now. But do you know someone who would be willing to step into this role? Get them to help you with the recruitment. And then when you recruit, share the job description and develop some kind of orientation of new board members so that they know, if I'm going to be a board member, I need to do this. Because it is hard. There are people who get on boards, and I think I said somewhat of this earlier, some of them just don't know. Honestly, there's always some people who say, oh, it would be great to be on a board. It looks good. Looks good on my resume. Whatever. You don't want those people ultimately, or you want to convert those people to true, passionate supporters who will put in some time. And sometimes they just need guidance on how to do that. Sometimes they really don't know what it means to be a board member. So there's a lot of resources out there on, sample job descriptions, what it takes to be a good board member. You're welcome to reach out to us after, and we can share some of that with you and kind of point you in the direction of some tips. So I know it's 12:45 and we promised to let everybody go. So they had a little break before their next session. Any last questions? All right. Well, thank you all for this. I'm going to stop the share and just say a quick, now that we can see everybody in bigger names, I guess. Thank you all for joining us, and you are welcome to reach out to us. Like I said, we're with GRG, Adam and Heather, and we are happy to answer any follow-up questions that you have. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time. Enjoyed
Take
it.
care.
Bye-bye.
Good luck.